Tonight, the Liberals promised to crack down on youth crime, prompting an angry response from the Children's Commissioner. Also tonight, outrage and confusion after a reported 112 people were killed trying to access aid in Gaza. Medical authorities moved to stop pharmacies producing their own versions of weight loss drugs. And Wellington's green pitch, tailor-made for Cameron. Good evening, Guy Stayner with ABC News. The Liberal Party is promising to get tough on young and repeat offenders if it wins government, saying harsher penalties and a new police strike force will help community members and business owners feel safe. But child safety advocates are accusing the Liberals of ignoring the rights of children in the wake of the Commission of Inquiry.
These business owners in Hobart's northern suburbs say they're fed up dealing with youth crime.
The behaviour outside the store and through Main Road Moona is completely intolerable.
Customers also, they don't feel comfortable coming to the area.
A day after reigniting a forest war, the Liberal Party has turned its attention to young offenders.
The whole throw our hands up in the air and pretend that people committing crimes are the real victims does not pass the pub test in our community.
It's announced a crime crackdown, recruiting 60 extra police officers, creating a permanent strike force to target repeat and young offenders, doubling penalties for hooning, and a new law allowing judges to give harsher penalties to offenders who boast about their crimes on social media. Child safety advocates say the policy demonises young people, but does nothing to fix the problem.
A crackdown on crime never works. What works is addressing the causes of crime. And if you don't address the causes of crime, then basically you're generating further problems into the future.
Locking more kids up in Ashley and seeing them abused in that institution is simply not an appropriate thing to do in the wake of the Commission of Inquiry.
The inquiry called for Ashley to be shut down urgently, and political opponents say the Liberals should focus on implementing its many other recommendations.
The Liberals' approach today completely misses the mark because it misunderstands the reason we're seeing crime occur in our community in the first place.
If you're able to just go back home to the broken family that you potentially come from, you won't get the therapeutic services that could turn your life around.
Premier Jeremy Rockliff says implementing the Commission's 191 recommendations is his highest priority. But Children's Commissioner Leanne McLean says the Liberals' policy is punitive and populist and has no place in a post-Commission of Inquiry Tasmania. Adam Langenberg, ABC News.
And later in this edition, the extended edition of ABC News, we put key questions to a handful of independent candidates. What will it take for the major parties to secure their support to govern? And what issues matter most to voters? That's coming up. Hundreds of people have been killed and wounded in Gaza after piling onto aid trucks that were part of an Israeli-protected convoy. Israeli officials acknowledge their troops opened fire, but say many people were trampled. US President Joe Biden says the incident could derail peace talks between Hamas and Israel. Middle East correspondent Alison Horn has this report and a warning it contains confronting footage.
The aftermath of the latest bloody chapter in this conflict. These men, women and children hurt or killed while trying to get desperately needed food. What should have been a moment of hope, the delivery of aid to a section of northern Gaza facing famine and starvation, turning deadly. Israel has released this vision, it says, shows crowds swarming the aid trucks. Palestinian health officials say Israeli troops opened fire on the waiting crowd, killing more than 100 and injuring more than 700.
Our children went to get a bag of flour to feed their families and they ran over our children and shot them.
Israel's military says its troops were there securing the passage of the convoy and claims the crowds approached their forces in a manner that posed a threat to the troops, who responded with live fire. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari says dozens of Gazans were killed and injured from pushing, trampling and being run over by the trucks.
The tanks that were there to secure the convoy sees the Gazans being trampled and cautiously tries to disperse the mob with a few warning shots.
The UN says it's been unable to deliver food regularly and safely to northern Gaza for more than 5 weeks. Hamas says this incident could derail negotiations for a deal on a temporary ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. Before the war, Ibrahim Ahmed used to build houses. Now he digs graves, 30 to 40 each day, he says. The sound of Israeli drones, a constant companion.
As a human being with feelings, it feels sad to go from building villas and buildings, which I love, to digging and making graves.
A moment of tenderness for the dead in a war marked by brutality for those living through it. Alison Horn, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Telstra's CEO has today apologised to the family of a Victorian who died after calls for help weren't immediately transferred to paramedics. The telco says it's investigating why its operators were unable to connect callers to 000 workers in several states early this morning. The ambulance union says the system breakdown caused chaos.
They're the first responders in emergencies. But in the early hours of this morning, the system transferring 000 calls to emergency service workers failed.
They said it was chaos and they did everything they could. They had to call back a lot of patients who hadn't been able to get through.
When the system is functioning correctly, callers to emergency services are transferred by national Telstra call takers to the appropriate service in their state. But from 3:30 to 5 o'clock this morning, Telstra call takers were forced to email contact details of 148 calls to emergency services. Other calls were transferred manually, with a total of 494 calls affected.
It would have been stressful for the Telstra operators who are trying to capture information and ask questions of the caller who's ringing for the emergency. They're not trained to know what to ask.
The ambulance union says one man in Victoria had a cardiac arrest and died.
There was a delay in the dispatch and that's led to quite a significant delay in the person getting care. Now, whether that's a factor in the person's survival or not, we can never know.
Telstra has promised a forensic investigation, saying it will review its processes.
Can I just first offer my deepest apology to the family of that person and, in fact, to anyone who was impacted.
Multiple states, including Victoria, were affected by this morning's outage, but Telstra is not saying where else it caused problems. The state and federal governments say they'll be seeking answers.
The Australian Communications and Media Authority is undertaking an initial assessment of Telstra's compliance with its regulatory obligations.
Telstra says the service has been stable since 5 a.m.
No call should wait. Every call is an emergency.
Sasha Payne, ABC News, Melbourne.
A 13-year-old boy suffered serious injuries when a motorbike he and 3 other teenagers were riding collided with a car yesterday afternoon. Tasmania Police says the collision happened at an intersection in Herdsman's Cove in Hobart's northern suburbs about 5:30. The 13-year-old was taken to the Royal Hobart Hospital in a serious condition. A 17-year-old boy who was operating the trail bike and 2 14-year-olds who were passengers remain in hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The 53-year-old woman driving the car was unhurt. Police are appealing for witnesses to contact them.
Look, we're just looking for any information, any dash cam footage or any other footage, any witnesses who may have seen either of the vehicles in the lead up to the crash. If people could just come forward with that just to assist us in putting together the pieces of the circumstances of the crash.
A Melbourne pharmacy has been raided as part of an ongoing investigation into the illegal manufacture of weight loss medications. Meanwhile, the drug regulator says it wants to ban compounding pharmacists from making copycat versions of the drugs originally intended to treat type 2 diabetes.
It's a shock move backed by doctors.
These rules are there to protect individuals. They're not there to be exploited by big business.
The TGA has written to doctors and pharmacy groups about its intention to crack down on copycat versions of popular diabetes drugs.
We welcome the letter. However, we just want to ensure that it doesn't ban compounding outright.
When medications like Ozempic and Mounjaro are in short supply, pharmacists can make their own versions, which aren't tested for safety or quality by the TGA. But they have to be individualised for each patient with a script and can't be made in bulk. There are fears some are doing just that.
These drugs are known. We can't tell people whether they work, and it's really the safety aspect that concerns us most for the community.
It comes amid a Four Corners investigation. Now the TGA wants to ban pharmacists from making GLP-1 agonist drugs like Ozempic.
All of those drugs will be removed from the compounding exemptions.
Consumer groups worry for diabetic patients.
We're really calling on the government to try and do more in this space to get a better supply of Ozempic into Australia.
While they welcome the crackdown, pharmacists say the law is already adequate.
The TGA needs to play a more active role in oversight of these pharmacies that are manufacturing in large quantities.
While the TGA waits for feedback on the proposed ban, the ABC understands there are a number of ongoing state and federal investigations into compounding pharmacies. As part of that, the agency raided a compounding pharmacy in Melbourne yesterday, seizing a large amount of semaglutide, peptides and human growth hormones. The TGA will allege they've been made illegally and say they hold serious safety concerns about the medications. Elise Worthington, ABC News.
Survivors of the 2019 White Island disaster and families of the victims have been awarded nearly $10 million as part of a long-running prosecution of tourism operators in New Zealand. 6 guilty parties were sentenced today, with the largest fine being handed to Whakaari Management, the company held by the Buttle family who own the volcano. It's been ordered to pay nearly $1 million as a penalty for breaching workplace health and safety laws, as well as nearly half of the total reparation figure. The judge said although the company had no funds, there was a moral obligation to pay.
There is nothing to stop the Buttles, as WML's shareholders, from advancing the necessary funds to cover that obligation. We wait to see what the Buttles will do. The world is watching.
Still to come on ABC News. The latest on the national housing market, with Tasmania bucking the trend. And Paris prospects a decision on Sam Kerr's Olympic future. Well, with 35 seats up for grabs at this election, independents have a stronger than usual chance of winning seats. And recent polling indicates the major parties are likely to need the help of at least some independents to form government. For Stateline, we put key questions to a handful of independents who've already had experience sitting in Tasmania's lower house. In 20 seconds or less, why should someone vote for you?
Because I offer skills from being a business person, a local government person. I've worked in large not-for-profits and I've also worked in Parliament. So I'm bringing a range of skills and experience, and I can work collaboratively with all the other members of Parliament on things like health, housing, education, cost of living and transport.
I think that people should vote for me because I'm representing the forgotten people, which is the rural and regional people of Tasmania. And as people have seen so far with what I've done in the Parliament, that I will stand up when it's needed to be. When someone is needed to be standing up, I have done it.
Because I believe that I have demonstrated that I have the courage to stand my ground for things that I strongly believe, and for the pursuit of truth, fairness and accountability.
Over many years I've worked hard in my community. I'm present in my community, and either being in government or being on the crossbench or in opposition, I've got a history of fighting hard for people and trying to make a difference. The next parliament is going to be a very interesting one. It looks like no major party will have the numbers, and I've demonstrated over the last 2 years that I can work with people in a mature way to achieve outcomes.
As a true independent, I commit, and I have committed to, being the voice of the community, not of party politics. So I'm there to represent what's in the best interest of the community, to be their voice, to shine a light on the issues that matter to them, and not focus on party politics.
What's the most important issue for you at this election?
Cost of living is the biggest one, but also I would say GPs, the health system.
Look, it's health and housing, but it's also integrity. So making sure that the Parliament is accountable for doing what it says it should be doing. So it's about making sure that when they say we're going to provide more housing, that they do. When they say we're going to improve health outcomes, that they do. When we say we're going to have integrity in our institutions, they do as well.
Well, I think there are many issues that are front of mind for people in Tasmania and in Franklin. Housing, for me, is a very important issue, but also I think they want the Parliament to work.
There are a number of issues for me that work hand in hand, and I think you can't just say I'm addressing only housing or I'm addressing only health. You have to address housing and health together, and also address education, because they are the triangle that underpins a community becoming a strong community and being empowered.
I think changing the way we do government. We cannot continue with this farcical way of infighting, party groupthink and political trickery. We need promises that are delivered. We need everything rigorously scrutinised by people who know how to do the job.
New Hobart Stadium, yes or no?
No.
I support the concept because essentially it won't just be for 7 AFL games. This could be a facility that could drive significant economic investment in the state for decades to come. It's a generational asset, and on that basis I'm willing to say yes and support it, and the government needs to do the work to deliver it in a sustainable way.
I'm open to the stadium. I do think it needs rigorous investigation. I'm more partial to Stadium 2 if we have to have one. I think it is publicly and private partnership idea is a much better one.
No Hobart Stadium. Unfortunately, we have far too many people who are sleeping homeless. We have far too many people waiting on elective surgery. And quite frankly, when we're talking about where should we be spending our valuable taxpayers' dollars, it's in health, housing and education every time for me.
I'm not for it, I'm not against it, and I just want to get the facts on the table before I make a decision.
What will the next government have to do to win your support?
I will work with and talk to the leaders of the major parties and also other independents and other crossbench members to try and form consensus and to try and form stability so that we're not constantly going back to the polls early, having constant elections and chaos in Parliament.
I don't do deals, but I do look for integrity and I look for collaboration within the Parliament. So what I want to see from the next government, whoever that might be, is honesty, accountability and integrity and a willingness to work with what the people have elected, the Parliament the people have elected, to ensure that we get good outcomes for the community.
This is about negotiation and getting the best outcomes for Tasmanians, especially rural and regional people, and getting access to GPs is probably the biggest issue.
It will have to be honest. It just will not be able to get away with the lies. It will be held to account. I know what they got up to last time and I'm not going to let them do it again.
They have to demonstrate that they're putting Tasmanian first. So I will always look for people and members of Parliament that put Tasmanians first and they do not put their political interests first.
In one word, what issue will decide this election?
It's a very good question. Stability.
Integrity.
Health.
Cost of living, but that's 3 words.
Cost of living, which is 3 words, but cost of living, I think, is the main thing that people are focused at the moment and they're very worried about it.
A vigil is taking place in Sydney tonight for young couple Luke Davies and Jessie Baird. It's been almost 2 weeks since they were allegedly murdered by a New South Wales police officer, and just 3 days since their bodies were found. Our reporter Leah Harris is there.
Hundreds of people have gathered here in a Darlinghurst Park in the inner city of Sydney for the silent vigil honouring Jessie Baird and Luke Davies. Among the people here include Jessie and Luke's close friends who have organised this vigil with some help from local MP Alex Greenwich, who is the independent MP for the City of Sydney. Lord Mayor Clover Moore is also here, along with the state's Police Minister Yasmin Catley. They have all signed the condolences books, which are here, which people are being encouraged to sign. They will be passed on to the men's families at the end of this evening. And many people here are close friends of Jessie and Luke. Some are acquaintances and colleagues. Some of Jessie's colleagues from Network 10 are here, along with some Qantas colleagues of Luke's who are also here. But many people here had never met either of the men. They've simply come to pay their respects and grieve as a community. This is a case that has touched so many people across the country, but especially the queer community here in Sydney. And with the Mardi Gras parade happening tomorrow, which is normally a fun and happy celebration of the queer community, many felt that they needed to gather tonight to honour and remember the lives of the two members of their community who were much loved, whose lives have been tragically and violently taken.
In the wake of a recent massacre that killed 70 people in Papua New Guinea's highlands, attention has turned to the firearms used by villagers. Analysis of videos posted to social media reveal most of the weapons were Australian and American manufactured assault rifles sold decades ago to PNG's Defence Force, and a warning some images in this story may be confronting.
On the way to attack their enemy, men from 3 allied tribes were ambushed. 2 weeks on from this horrific massacre, the death toll continues to climb as bodies are found in nearby rivers and bush, and others die from their injuries. Videos taken in the lead up to the violence reveal clear warning signs and the considerable firepower carried by these tribesmen. Here in January, the Ambulan tribe march in a show of force. At the front, about 9 assault rifles, mainly M16s or AR-15s, American guns that would have been sold to PNG's Defence Forces decades ago.
Guns are not being brought into Papua New Guinea by, evil foreigners. In fact, they're leaking out from state stocks. They're leaking out from the police and the army.
Like this one, the Australian SLR. Thousands were made for PNG's Defence Force before winding up in the highlands.
They're the most popular assault rifle in Papua New Guinea. They're very, very popular with mercenaries because they have good long range, they're very accurate, and they've got a heavy bullet. Which makes them lethal at a much longer distance.
This bullpup firearm, a more modern weapon, is designed for urban combat. Bullets sprayed into the air indicate ammunition is also in far greater supply than decades ago. Police sources say they most likely originate from state supplies.
These guns have what we call a long decay curve. They have a long life. If you look after them, they can still be working 100 years from now. And so as long as you can get the ammunition for them, they will remain lethal.
Recent massacres would not be possible without these guns and ammunition, which are allegedly bought and supplied by wealthy tribal leaders, financiers who police will now target in a bid to curb the ongoing bloodshed. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Port Moresby.
A sinkhole has opened at an industrial site in Sydney, causing a partial building collapse. Emergency services were called to the street in the city south following reports a large area of ground had collapsed. No one was injured. The sinkhole opened directly above the construction of the new M6 tunnel, damaging an industrial building. Transport workers inside the tunnel noticed the roof beginning to sink. It's a tough time for many people at the moment, with higher interest rates and cost of living pressures squeezing household budgets. Despite that, the latest data shows house prices are still rising in most capitals, although Hobart values fell slightly.
On a hot day, this family's coming to inspect what some real estate agents might call a renovator's delight.
It needs work, as you'd expect. We knew that coming in. For us, we need to be able to live in a place as we fix it up with the 2 little kids.
But agent Luke Secco is confident the corner house in Australia's second biggest market will be hot property when it goes under the hammer.
With the talk of rates coming off or dropping, we're finding that there's more buyers out there and the market's picking up.
Figures from CoreLogic show prices rose nationally by 0.6% in February and nearly 9% over the year. Perth led the monthly gains, followed by Adelaide, Brisbane, Canberra, the regions, Sydney, Melbourne and Darwin, while Hobart went backwards. Rents also had the strongest monthly rise since March last year, up 0.9%. The results are surprising to some due to the current state of the economy, with rising unemployment, higher interest rates and cost of living pressures squeezing household budgets.
It looks like the housing market has actually avoided a cyclical downswing. That's where it looked like the market was going at the end of last year.
Economists say prospective buyers are optimistic about the potential for an interest rate cut later this year. And house prices are holding up because not enough properties are up for sale. Some predictions are that house prices might continue to rise this year. Does that factor into any decision making?
Yeah, you always worry about the ladder being pulled up and never being able to get on.
A hope shared by many reaching for the Australian dream. Nadia Daly, ABC News.
The company that owns Facebook says it will stop paying Australian media for news content when their current deals expire. The tech giant Meta has paid millions of dollars to Australian media companies, including the ABC. The government slammed the move, but Meta says its customers don't come to its platforms for news and political content.
The fight between the Australian media and tech giants is rebooting. Now Facebook's owner Meta is no longer willing to pay for news.
We're not talking about some plucky little startup here. We're talking about one of the world's largest and most profitable companies.
Selfish, derelict and destructive. Few Australian leaders had anything kind to say about the company today.
The government takes the view that this is a dereliction of its responsibility to Australia.
Meta has decided not to renew a deal it struck 3 years ago. Back then, the government passed laws forcing big tech to pay for the use of news. But today, in a statement, Meta said people don't come to Facebook for news and political content. The decision could cost news outlets millions.
And even though we know that these commercial deals are confidential, we are aware of reports that it's some $200 million that will be impacted here.
There are even concerns it might switch off the lights for some smaller players.
For some, it could be fatal that they lose this access to money.
Former ACCC chairman Rod Sims helped negotiate the code 3 years ago.
I think this is a very selfish decision by Meta and Facebook. It means that they're not willing to pay for content that they benefit from.
We need the federal government not to blink here. The very reason this code came into being was to ensure that the digital giants paid their way.
The government has signalled it's unwilling to let this slide.
Nobody should be under any doubt about the government's resolve to ensure that we have a viable media industry in this country.
It's seeking advice on its next steps, which could include compelling Facebook to the bargaining table. Ange Lavoie-Pierre, ABC News.
To finance now, and the local share market has climbed to a new height. Here's David Chow.
13 rate hikes from the Reserve Bank have barely put a dent in house prices. Now they're starting to rise again more quickly. On growing speculation, there'll be rate cuts. And the numbers are eye-watering when you consider how much prices have gone up since the dark days of COVID, especially in Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, where prices have hit record highs. Now here's how much prices have risen in dollar terms. In 4 years, most cities have risen by around $200,000 to $300,000, which widens the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And demand from foreign buyers has hit its highest level in 6 years. But keep in mind, they've bought up 10% of new properties and just 4% of existing housing. So most of the competition, by far, is domestic. Meanwhile, it was a decent day for the share market, which rose 0.6% to finish at a record high. And it's up 1.4% over the week on bets that a rate cut might happen sooner rather than later. Today, shares of Life 360 surged 38.5%. It's a company with an app to help parents track the live location of their children. And it reported a full-year loss of $28 million, which is a huge improvement compared to last year. Lithium stocks did well, but healthcare companies were the worst performers. And there was a lot of enthusiasm overseas, with markets in Japan and the US also hitting record highs, while gold is at its highest level in a month, and the Aussie dollar is buying just over 65 US cents. And that's finance.
A career best innings from all-rounder Cameron Green has put Australia in a strong position at stumps on day 2 of the first test against New Zealand in Wellington. Green finished on 174 not out after a record last wicket partnership with Josh Hazlewood. Australia then dismissed the Black Caps for a modest 179. Australia then lost another 2 wickets of their own, including Steve Smith for a duck.
New Zealand will want to get rid of this pair.
New Zealand needed only 1 wicket to wrap up Australia's innings, but that wicket would prove elusive.
Oh, goodness me. Wow.
Number 11, Josh Hazlewood, did his best impersonation of a top-order batter, and Cameron Green showed why selectors promoted him to number 4.
What a way to bring up 150. The first time past that milestone.
The pair combined for 116, Australia's highest ever 10th wicket partnership against New Zealand. Green was unbeaten on 174.
This session has been a disaster for New Zealand. But
there were more calamities to come, with the world's top-ranked batter, Kane Williamson, out for a duck.
Got to hurry, he's a mix-up. Well, I cannot believe it. Will Young's looking, can't believe it, and then he takes off, and then, oh no. Bang, bang, they run into one another. Great piece of throwing.
Some could no longer bear to watch as the Black Caps crashed to 5 for 29.
to get out like that, gut-wrencher.
Glenn Phillips made a counter-attacking 71.
Oh, what a shot that is.
Nathan Lyon picked up 4 wickets as the home team was dismissed for 179. Australia chose not to enforce the follow-on, but might have wished it had.
Got him! Yes, he's got one!
Tim Southey soon had 2 as Marnus Labuschagne's run of outs continued. And it could have been even better for the Black Caps, with night watchman Lyon dropped on the last ball of an eventful day. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
The father of Matilda's captain, Sam Kerr, says she is definitely out of the Paris Olympics in July as she continues to recover from a knee injury. Kerr ruptured an anterior cruciate ligament in January while in a mid-season training camp with Chelsea in Morocco. The Matildas qualified for the Paris Olympics after a 10-0 thrashing of Uzbekistan in Melbourne this week. Team management has said Kerr will be medically assessed in April and a decision made on her inclusion then. But Roger Kerr says his daughter is out.
He's in rehab now in Chelsea, and it's a lonely life, rehab. You're by yourself and just plugging away with the rehab things. But she's mentally well, and she's disappointed that she's missed the Olympics, but hopefully she'll be back within 12 months.
To the weather, and this sunrise from Bruny Island was captured by Ellie Davidson. It was mild around the state today, with all of the population centres in the low to mid-20s. We don't often see Maria Island topping the state. It had 26 degrees along with Swansea. Hobart, Devonport and St Helens all had 25, Launceston and Burnie 24. There were just a couple of millimetres falling yesterday and overnight about the west. The satellite image shows a front approaching the state. It should brush the south of Tasmania tonight. Tomorrow we'll be in a southwesterly airstream. There's another front to our southwest down the bottom of the screen. It's going to combine with this high in the Bight, and it's going to generate very strong winds on Saturday night into Sunday, creating extreme fire danger in parts of the state on Sunday. Across the country tomorrow, showers in Sydney and Melbourne. The chance of a shower in Canberra and Perth. Storms in Darwin, Adelaide fine and 27, Brisbane 33. Back home, there'll be showers about the west, far south and central areas that will ease in the afternoon. There's a high chance of showers about the west, just 16 degrees in Queenstown tomorrow, 20 in Burnie and Smithton, Devonport 22, Launceston 23. Heading east, 21 in St Helens, Swansea and Campbelltown, 17 in Oatlands, and Hobart's heading for a top of 20 degrees after a low of 12. Sunrise tomorrow will be at 10 to 7. On coastal waters, there'll be west to southwesterly winds of 15 to to 30 knots, reaching up to 35 knots about the south tomorrow night. There are gale warnings from Tasman Island to Low Rocky Point and strong wind warnings for all other coastal waters except the far northwest. It won't be hot Sunday, but the winds will be strong enough to trigger a total fire ban, with west to southwesterly winds becoming strong and gusty in the morning, combined with extremely dry fuel loads around the state. Monday will be fine, apart from possible morning showers about the west, and next week's looking perfect, unless you're hoping for rain. And that is the news for now. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.